Let's try to create a little inventory here of questions that might be answered by organizational theory. Is the purpose of organizational theory to give a basis for explanation of the behavior of organizations or of the behavior of individuals within organizations? Or is the purpose possibly to discover similarities across different types of organizations, hospitals to insurance companies to newspapers?
Right.
I wonder if any of the three of those, or maybe other possibilities as well, you'd say, yes, that's the primary purpose.
No, I don't think I can't say that there's a primary purpose.
Uh-huh.
For instance, a comparison across types or institutional forms or parallels between finding typologies of technology, like Chick Perot did at one point in the 60s.
Yes.
And say, okay, this notion of raw materials, you can think of raw materials in a correctional institution, and you can think of raw materials in a factory, and depending upon whether you have standardized technologies or not for processing them, if you have standardized techniques, they ought to look at the same across those. And so there was, I thought, a very fruitful period when that was going on. And my late colleague at Vanderbilt, James Thompson, was a master at developing typologies of organizations that had a lot of intellectual bite. You could see from Jim's typologies the parallels between professional associations and how they process knowledge as contrasted with, and the professional association is where there's the agreement on a zone but no precise measurement of specific outcomes. So there's a kind of consensus of goals and means without firm allocation procedures. Contrast that with a bureaucratic organization where there is a relatively unitary goal or set of goals and known relationships to outputs. So therefore you can hierarchize and delegate, measure at each different level. And he would use a typology like that to say, oh, look, isn't this interesting? How these, even though we're not talking about coal mines versus, or we're not talking just within an industry, we're talking cross-industry, but the parallels in the forms of behavior. And that was a very fruitful period. It then went awry, and it went to ground for a number of reasons. You can make an ex post facto explanation of why it went to ground, why the new forms developed, what questions weren't being answered by Thompson and Perot of that period. But that then leads you to theories that look very different than what was going on in the 60s in this area from what was going on in the 70s in this area. So it's a very important question, and yet I can't give you a unitary. Some people might be able to give a unitary answer. I've always been a little more forgiving about difference in the field.
Right.
I'm not an ideologist.
No, that's...
My area happens to be my way or the highway. There are people who think that way.
What is your own interest in explanation about organizations? What are you interested in explaining?
Well, I for the last 20 years, I've worked, I've been in the field for, I was thinking the other day, I started publishing, I did my first publication in 1957, I think, or 56. So that's 52 years ago.
Yes.
I don't feel that old, incidentally, but that's, it's a long time. And so certainly the last 20 years, my contribution to organizational stuff as opposed to social movements and the organization of social movements has been most of it. And I wouldn't say I don't have such aspirations for organizations as I did in involvement. I still think that the political economy approach was very useful, and it solves a number of problems that most other theories didn't, but you wouldn't be able to buy that out in the general public of organizational theorists.
Well, let's turn to that other interesting subject, which is social movements,
Okay.
which, again, to me seem like such an important, interesting piece of sociological research, partly because they're so varied. They may be political movements, they may be race or ethnicity movements, they may be students who are really angry they don't have a good parking space on the Dearborn campus.
Speaking from personal experience.
Exactly right. So it's, in one sense, it's a very heterogeneous
Yes.
group of phenomena. So it's, in a sense, you might say it's a very hard set of topics to provide any general theory of.
Right.
And yet you have offered general theories.
Right, or something that should be useful for thinking across all kinds of movements. And incidentally, one of the turning points in study of social movements, which there's now a movement to back away from, including me. If you go back to I don't want to give you a whole lecture about the history of the study of social movements, but going back one step, in America, in American sociology, there was Chicago school sociologists that had the monopoly within defining collective behavior in social movements. And political sociology out of Columbia later broadened that some, although it's not given enough credit in the literature. But for if you go back to the Chicago people who made this a field, starting with Herbert Bloomer, and then going through people like Turner and Lou Killian. Why am I forgetting Turner's first name at the moment? Ralph Turner. They studied all kinds of social movements under the one banner of the collective behavior social movement approach. And religious movements were just another site. You weren't, for them, they were not interested in contributing to sociology of religion, although it did, but they're interested in saying, is what Christian Science as a movement, Mary Baker Eddy as a movement, founder of a movement. And one of the big turns, which has been very fruitful, but which we're now moving away from, was the turn towards political movements as being the corpus of all the major topic of study. So and political movements aimed at the state or in relationship to the state. And so now there's in fact a movement away, which you see in many people, Dave Snow, Verda Taylor, to say, look, there's all kinds of contention in society, and you can be aiming at changing culture and changing identities in the broader culture. Yeah, sometimes there may be a political target there too, but a lot of the action is, and a lot of the noise is, a lot of the mobilization is around authority in other settings than the state. All authority has a power moving, but school board power, authorities in religious denominations, conflicts over the direction of denominations. That's contention within a form of organization, and the theories that we have should be useful in studying those as well as the state. So that's a movement away, and that's important here because. In fact, it just is the case that, including my stuff, was largely focused on political state, although it's been picked up a lot in sociology of religion as well. But so, I wandered around on answering your questions, but that's